Judge Amara Richardson's hands trembled as she stared at the gun pointed at her face. Officer Blake Hawkins's cold blue eyes showed no recognition, despite the 20 years they'd known each other. "Get out of the stolen vehicle now," he barked, the squad car lights painting her black Mercedes in red and blue. 3 more police cruisers screeched to the scene, officers emerging with weapons drawn. Beneath her judicial robes on the back seat lay the answer to why this decorated officer wanted her dead. The dashcam was still recording, capturing everything. Would this become another statistic, or would justice finally prevail? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up for justice and exposing corruption, hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated on more powerful stories that need to be told. The prestigious mahogany gavel that Judge Amara Richardson had wielded for 15 years held no power on the rain-slicked asphalt of Oakwood Avenue. Her black Mercedes sedan, a 10-year reward to herself after making history as the youngest black female judge appointed to the Westlake County Superior Court, was now apparently evidence in a crime she knew nothing about. The dashboard clock read 8:15 p.m., just 40 minutes after she had finally packed her briefcase and left the courthouse after an exhausting day of hearings. The rain had just started coming down, gentle at first, then transitioning to the kind of heavy downpour that made the streetlights blur. She had flipped her turn signal, preparing to make the familiar left toward her neighborhood when the police cruiser lights flashed in her rearview mirror. At first, she assumed the officer needed to pass her, perhaps responding to an emergency. But when the cruiser stayed directly behind her, she pulled to the curb, following protocol she had explained to countless defendants in her courtroom. She put the car in park, turned down the Ella Fitzgerald playing through her speakers, and reached for her purse containing her license and registration. Through her rain-speckled side mirror, she watched the approaching officer, noticing his hand already resting on his holstered weapon. Something about his confident stride struck her as familiar. When he reached her window, recognition dawned instantly. Officer Blake Hawkins. Just yesterday, he had stood in her courtroom, visibly seething as she denied his request for a no-knock warrant in a drug case targeting the predominantly black community of East Westlake. "License and registration," he said flatly, raindrops beating on his department-issued cap, his face illuminated in harsh intervals by the red and blue lights. No recognition showed in his expression, though they had interacted professionally dozens of times over the years. "Good evening, Officer Hawkins," Amara said calmly, handing over her documents. "May I ask why I was pulled over? I don't believe I violated any traffic laws." The officer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This vehicle matches the description of a car reported stolen about an hour ago." Amara blinked in surprise. "There must be some mistake. I've owned this car for years. The registration I just handed you confirms that." Officer Hawkins barely glanced at the papers. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "Officer Hawkins, you know who I am," Amara said, struggling to maintain her composure. "I'm Judge Richardson from Superior Court." "Step out of the vehicle now," he repeated, his voice hardening as he unsnapped his holster. The situation was escalating rapidly and inexplicably. Amara's heart pounded, but she drew on years of courtroom experience to keep her voice steady. "I'm going to comply, but I want to be clear that this is my vehicle, and there's been a mistake." Slowly, deliberately, she opened the door and stepped out into the rain. Within seconds, her tailored blazer was soaked through. "Officer Hawkins, here's my judicial ID as well," she said, reaching into her pocket. "Hands where I can see them," Hawkins shouted, drawing his weapon and aiming it directly at her. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." Amara froze, hands halfway raised, rainwater streaming down her face. "Officer, this is completely unnecessary. You know who I am." "I said turn around," he barked. "You match the description of the suspect, black female 40 to 50 driving a black Mercedes." The absurdity of the description hit her like a physical blow. Half the judges in the county drove similar vehicles. Before she could protest further, Hawkins roughly spun her around, slamming her against the wet metal of her car. The cold handcuffs bit into her wrists as he tightened them several clicks past necessary. "This is outrageous," she managed, wincing at the pain. "Call your supervisor immediately." Hawkins ignored her, speaking into his shoulder radio. Dispatch, I've detained the suspect in the stolen vehicle case, requesting backup at Oakwood and Maple. Within minutes, 3 more police cruisers arrived, their combined lights turning the rainy night into a disorienting carnival of red and blue. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, approaching as if she were armed and dangerous rather than a handcuffed judge in professional attire. "Check the vehicle," Hawkins instructed the others, his voice carrying a note of authority that suggested he was the senior officer present. 2 officers began searching her car without consent or warrant, while another stood guard over Amara, in the rain. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered despite the weather, some with phones raised, recording the spectacle of a well-dressed black woman in handcuffs surrounded by police. "You know this is a legal search and seizure," Amara said to the young officer guarding her, hoping to find a reasonable person in the growing chaos. "I am Judge Amara Richardson of the Westlake County Superior Court. This is my vehicle, and Officer Hawkins is well aware of who I am." The young officer looked uncomfortable, but remained silent, glancing toward Hawkins for instruction. "Sir," called one of the officers searching her car, "there's a judicial robe and court documents in the back seat." Hawkins strolled over unhurriedly to inspect the findings. "Interesting. Looks like our suspect may have stolen more than just the car. This is absurd." Amara's professional composure was cracking. "Call the courthouse administrator right now, or better yet, call Chief Justice Williams. He'll confirm my identity." "We'll sort all that out at the station," Hawkins replied with a cold smile. "Right now, we have a stolen vehicle, and someone with what could be stolen court documents. For all we know, you could be impersonating a judge." As they prepared to place her in the back of a police cruiser, a man stepped forward from the gathered crowd. "I've got all this on video," he announced, holding up his phone. "That's Judge Richardson. I've been in her courtroom. You officers know exactly who she is." Hawkins turned to the bystander. "Sir, step back or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business." The man retreated but called out, "I'm sending this to the news right now." Amara, rain-soaked and humiliated, her professional dignity stripped away, realized with sudden clarity what was happening. This wasn't a mistake. This was retaliation. Just yesterday in her courtroom, she had rejected Officer Hawkins's request for a no-knock warrant that would have allowed his tactical team to raid homes in East Westlake without announcement, an area predominantly populated by black families. His evidence had been circumstantial at best, and the risks to innocent residents far outweighed the potential benefits. She had seen the rage in his eyes then, barely contained beneath his professional veneer. Now, with no one to witness but his fellow officers and random civilians with cell phones, that rage had found its outlet. As they guided her toward the police car, she looked Hawkins directly in the eyes. "This won't end the way you think it, will, officer," she said quietly. "The truth has a way of coming to light." His response was a smile that never reached his eyes. "We'll see about that, Your Honor. We'll see about that." By midnight, Judge Amara Richardson's world had imploded in ways she could never have imagined 24 hours earlier. The holding cell at the Westlake Police Department smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair, a space she had heard described countless times by defendants in her courtroom, but had never expected to experience firsthand. Her request to make a phone call had been repeatedly delayed, officers claiming they were still processing her paperwork and verifying her identity procedures that should have taken minutes, not hours. Through the small window in the cell door, she could see officers gathering around a computer screen, laughing. One pointed at the monitor and nudged another, and Amara realized with a sinking feeling that they were watching the video of her arrest. Worse, when an officer finally came to update her, he mentioned offhandedly that the situation was getting quite a bit of attention online. The video of her detention had gone viral, but not in its complete form. An edited version showing only fragments of the interaction out of context, making her appear uncooperative and entitled, was spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. At 2:30 in the morning, the cell door finally opened. A stern-faced desk sergeant appeared. "Your identity has been confirmed," he announced without apology. "You're free to go. Your personal effects are at the front desk." "What about my car?" Amara asked, her voice hoarse. "Still impounded as evidence," he replied. You can apply for its release through the proper channels." "Evidence of what exactly?" she demanded. "No charges have been filed because there was no crime." The sergeant shrugged. "Not my department. Take it up with the investigating officer." Outside the police station, the night had turned cold after the rain, and Amara pulled her still damp blazer tighter around her shoulders. Her cell phone, returned with her other possessions, had died hours ago. As she prepared to call a rideshare, the station doors burst open and a flood of reporters and cameramen spilled out, surrounding her in a chaotic semicircle of flashing lights and shouted questions. "Judge Richardson, did you resist arrest? Is it true you pulled the race card when confronted by officers? Do you believe judges should be above the law? Were you intoxicated when driving the allegedly stolen vehicle?" Stunned by the ambush and exhausted from the ordeal, Amara raised her hands. "I have no comment at this time except to say that I was wrongfully detained while driving my own vehicle. This was a clear case of harassment and racial profiling, and I will be pursuing all legal remedies available." Her statement only seemed to incite more questions, but she pushed through the crowd toward the street, desperate to escape the nightmarish situation. As she waited for her rideshare to arrive, she scrolled through the notifications flooding her phone since it had restarted. Hundreds of comments on social media, many from accounts she didn't recognize, calling her entitled, playing the race card, and worse. Local news channels were already running with headlines like "Judge claims racial profiling after traffic stop" and "Belligerent woman claiming to be judge detained in stolen vehicle investigation." The next morning brought no relief. As she sat in her kitchen, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before her, the local morning news featured a press conference with Police Chief Thomas Reynolds. The chief, a tall man with silver hair and a chest full of commendations, spoke with unwavering confidence. "Our officers responded to a report of a stolen vehicle matching the exact description of the one Judge Richardson was driving," he stated firmly. "They followed standard protocol for high-risk stops involving potentially stolen vehicles. While we regret any inconvenience to Judge Richardson, public safety must remain our top priority. Our officers acted professionally throughout the incident." The reporter pressed him. "But sir, Officer Hawkins had appeared in Judge Richardson's courtroom just the day before she was detained. Could this have been retaliation for her ruling against him?" Chief Reynolds smiled thinly. "Officer Hawkins is a decorated 20-year veteran of this department with an exemplary record. The suggestion that he would abuse his authority for personal vendettas is frankly offensive. Our officers deal with hundreds of people weekly. They can't be expected to recognize everyone they encounter in the field, even if they've met them before." Amara nearly choked on her coffee. Hawkins had appeared in her courtroom dozens of times over the years. The idea that he wouldn't recognize her was absurd. Her doorbell rang, and she approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a delivery person leaving a package. When she opened the door, she discovered a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a printed screenshot of a social media post containing her home address, along with comments that made her blood run cold. "Now we know where the race-baiting judge lives. Someone should teach her some respect for law enforcement. I drive by there every day, might have to stop by and share my thoughts." Her hands shaking, Amara closed and locked the door, then checked all the windows to ensure they were secure. When her phone rang, she jumped, then saw it was her court clerk, Sophia Chen. "Judge Richardson." Sophia's voice was tight with concern. "I don't know if you're coming in today, but there are reporters camped outside the courthouse asking about you, and the Chief Justice wants to see you immediately." "Did he say what about?" "No, but he looks worried. And Judge, there's something else. I overheard the bailiffs talking. Your car was searched thoroughly after you were detained. They took photos of all the case files you had in your briefcase." The violation struck Amara like a physical blow. Those files contained confidential information about ongoing cases, including witness statements and sealed grand jury proceedings. If that information had been compromised, it could jeopardize multiple cases and potentially harm vulnerable witnesses. "Sophia, I need you to pull the docket for every case that Hawkins was involved in that came before me in the last 6 months, and find out who's handling the internal affairs investigation into last night." "That's just it," Sophia lowered her voice. "I don't think there is an investigation. The word around the courthouse is that the department considers it a routine. Stop with a case of mistaken identity. They're saying it's already been resolved. After hanging up, Amara sat in stunned silence, trying to process the rapid unraveling of her life and career. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from a respected judge to a subject of public ridicule and police intimidation. The system she had dedicated her life to upholding had turned against her with breathtaking efficiency. Her phone pinged with a news alert, and she opened it to find yet another blow. A local news channel was running an exclusive interview with a woman claiming to be a former client of Amara's from her days as a public defender, alleging that Amara had been aggressive and played the race card even back then. Amara had no recollection of the woman, and given that her public defender days were more than 15 years in the past, she suspected the interview was completely fabricated. As she prepared to head to the courthouse and face whatever awaited her there, Amara realized with grim clarity that this was far bigger than one traffic stop or one vindictive officer. This was a coordinated attack on her reputation, her career, and potentially her safety. The question was, how far would they go? And what could she possibly do to fight back against a system that seemed determined to destroy her? Have you ever felt like the entire world had turned against you overnight? Can you imagine fighting a system designed to protect power rather than truth? As Judge Amara Richardson stared at the shattered pieces of her professional reputation, scattered across headlines and social media, a fierce determination ignited within her. This wasn't just her fight anymore. This was about exposing a rot that had infected the very foundations of justice in Westlake County. They picked the wrong judge to intimidate, she whispered to herself, reaching for her phone. Marcus Washington's law office occupied the 10th floor of a modest building downtown, far from the gleaming glass towers of the big corporate firms. His practice specialized in civil rights cases and police misconduct, making him both the perfect ally in Amara's fight and a frequent target of the same system that was now coming after her. When she entered his office, he embraced her warmly, a gesture of solidarity that nearly broke through her carefully maintained composure. "I've been watching everything unfold," he said, guiding her to a seat. "Figured you'd be showing up soon." Marcus had been her law school classmate at Howard University 20 years earlier. While she had pursued a career in public service, eventually rising to the bench, he had dedicated himself to fighting injustice from the outside, taking on cases others considered unwinnable against powerful institutions. "They're trying to destroy me, Marcus," Amara said simply, "and I need to understand why." Over the next several hours, they began gathering the pieces of the puzzle. Sophia arrived during her lunch break, bringing courthouse records and whispered conversations she'd overheard among officers. They spread everything across Marcus's conference table. Complaints against Officer Hawkins that had been buried over the years. Records of cases where Amara had ruled against police requests for warrants or suppressed evidence obtained through questionable means, and the unedited dashcam footage that Marcus had obtained through a contact in the department. The dashcam told a different story than the viral video circulating online. It clearly showed Hawkins approaching Amara's car with his hand already on his weapon, despite the stop being supposedly routine. Most damning of all, there was a clear moment when recognition flashed across his face after seeing her driver's license, followed by what appeared to be a deliberate decision to escalate the situation anyway. There was never any stolen car. "Report, was there?" Amara asked, watching the footage for the third time. Marcus shook his head. "My contact checked. The report was entered into the system 20 minutes after Hawkins pulled you over, not before. He created a pretense to detain you, then fabricated the paperwork to justify it." As they continued digging, a pattern emerged. Sophia had compiled a list of judges and prosecutors who had experienced similar intimidation tactics after ruling against police interests. All of them were either Black, Latino, or had shown particular concern for racial justice issues. The intimidation ranged from minor harassment like parking tickets and constant traffic stops, to more serious incidents including home vandalism and anonymous threats. "This isn't random," Marcus said, connecting papers with red string like a detective in a crime drama. "This is systematic. They're targeting officials who don't rubber stamp whatever they want." By late afternoon, they were joined by two more allies. Darius Johnson, a tech expert who had once been wrongfully arrested by Hawkins, and now ran a community advocacy group documenting police misconduct. And Elena Vasquez, a reporter from an independent news outlet who had been investigating corruption in the Westlake Police Department for months. I've interviewed 6 other black professionals who were wrongfully stopped in your neighborhood in the last year alone, Elena explained, sharing her notes. All of them filed complaints. All of the complaints mysteriously disappeared. Darius nodded grimly. Same pattern with the dashboard camera footage from those incidents. Somehow it all gets corrupted or recorded over before it can be used as evidence. The pieces were forming a disturbing picture, but they still needed more. As evening approached, Marcus received a call that changed everything. An officer from the department's record division, speaking in hushed tones, agreed to meet them secretly. He had evidence that Chief Reynolds had personally ordered the deletion of civilian complaints against certain officers, including Hawkins. "We're building a case," Amara said, as they prepared for the meeting. "Internal Affairs, the Justice Department, the State Attorney General will file complaints with all of them simultaneously. They can't bury everything. And we take this public," Elena added. "The real story with evidence, not their edited version." For the first time since the nightmare began, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. The system was powerful, but it wasn't impenetrable. With the right allies and the right evidence, even the most entrenched corruption could be exposed. As they gathered their materials to leave, Amara's phone chimed with a notification. It was a message from an anonymous number, containing only a photo of her house taken that day, with officers clearly visible conducting surveillance. The message read, "Back off or next time we come inside." Amara showed the others, her hand, steady despite the implied threat. "They're scared," she said. "They wouldn't be threatening us if they weren't afraid of what we might find." Later that night, as Amara finally returned home, she found a small gathering of community members, standing vigil outside her house. They held handmade signs reading, "We stand with Judge Richardson and stop police intimidation." An elderly woman stepped forward and took Amara's hands in hers. "We've been watching the news," she said softly. "We know what they're trying to do to you, but we also know who you really are and what you stand for. You're not alone in this fight. What do you think would you have the courage to stand up against an entire system determined to silence you? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe the truth should always be fought for, no matter the cost. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed injustice and wished someone would take a stand. And subscribe to stay updated on powerful stories of resistance against oppression. As Amara looked at the supportive faces surrounding her, she felt both strengthened and burdened by the responsibility. How far would Chief Reynolds and Officer Hawkins go to protect their power? And what would be the next move in their campaign to destroy her? The answers would come sooner and more violently than she could have imagined. The temporary sense of empowerment Amara had felt while gathering allies evaporated the next morning when her phone rang at 6:30 a.m. The caller ID showed it was Chief Justice Williams of the State Superior Court, her direct supervisor and someone she had always respected as fair-minded, if somewhat politically cautious. "Amara," his voice was grave. "I need you to come to my chambers immediately. There's been a development." When she arrived at the courthouse an hour later, she had to pass through a gauntlet of reporters shouting questions and thrusting microphones toward her face. Inside, the normally friendly security guards averted their eyes as she passed through the metal detector. The courthouse, once her sanctuary, now felt hostile. Chief Justice Williams wasn't alone in his chambers. 2 members of the Judicial Ethics Committee sat alongside him, their expressions unreadable. "Judge Richardson," Williams began formally, despite having known her for over a decade, "I regret to inform you that the committee has received multiple complaints regarding your conduct, both on and off the bench." "What complaints?" Amara asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "From whom?" "The complaints are anonymous, as allowed by our procedures," replied Judge Helen Foster, chair of the Ethics Committee, and a close friend of Chief Reynolds. His wife served on her campaign committee when Foster had run for her seat. "They allege conduct unbecoming a judge, including making racially charged accusations against law enforcement without evidence." Amara couldn't believe what she was hearing. This is about my wrongful detention, isn't it? You're investigating me for being the victim of police misconduct. We're not here to debate the specifics, Foster continued coldly. The committee is opening a formal review. In the meantime, we strongly suggest you recuse yourself from all cases involving law enforcement. That's half my criminal docket, Amara protested. This is exactly what they want to remove me from cases where I might hold them accountable. Williams cleared his throat uncomfortably. There's more, Amara. The Police Benevolent Association has officially requested that you be removed from all cases involving their members. They claim you have demonstrated bias against law enforcement. This is retaliation, plain and simple, Amara said, her voice rising despite her best efforts. I'm being punished for being the victim of racial profiling. These are serious allegations from both sides, Williams replied, not meeting her eyes. The committee will investigate all claims thoroughly. Until then, I'm reassigning your cases, involving police testimony to other judges. Amara left the meeting in a state of shock that quickly transformed to anger. They were using the very mechanisms designed to protect judicial integrity to sideline her for speaking the truth. As she walked through the courthouse hallway toward her chambers, she noticed officers who normally greeted her warmly, now watching her with open hostility. Word had spread quickly. When she reached her office, Sophia was waiting with more disturbing news. Judge, Internal Affairs closed their preliminary inquiry into Officer Hawkins this morning. They're saying there was insufficient evidence of misconduct to pursue a full investigation. That's impossible, Amara said. They never even interviewed me, the alleged victim. That's not all, Sophia continued, lowering her voice. The court IT department came by earlier asking to check your computer for a supposed system update. I stalled them, but something felt off. Amara immediately called Marcus, putting him on speaker in her office after checking for listening devices using an app Darius had installed on her phone. They're making their move, she explained. Judicial ethics investigation, case reassignments, internal affairs whitewash. They're using every institutional lever to isolate me. We expected this, Marcus replied grimly, but I've got something they don't know about yet. My contact got me access to the original radio transmissions from the night of your detention. There's a 20-minute gap between when Hawkins first called in the stop and when he requested backup claiming a stolen vehicle. Something happened in those 20 minutes that he didn't want on the official record. We need that missing time, Amara said. I'm working on it. In the meantime, be careful with your communications. Assume everything is monitored. As if to confirm her fears, when Amara left the courthouse that evening, she noticed a dark sedan following her at a discreet distance. It stayed behind her for several blocks before peeling off when she approached a busy intersection. When she arrived home, she discovered the reason for the surveillance. Her front door had been spray-painted with a crude racial slur, and her mailbox had been smashed. She called the police, more to document the incident than out of any expectation of help. 2 officers arrived nearly an hour later, took minimal notes, and classified the incident as random property damage, despite the clearly targeted nature of the vandalism. We've had several incidents like this in the area, one officer claimed, though Amara knew her neighborhood had some of the lowest crime rates in the city. Probably just teenagers causing trouble. The next day brought yet another escalation. As Amara presided over a routine civil case, one of the few still on her rapidly diminishing docket, she noticed Officer Hawkins enter the courtroom in full uniform. He wasn't a witness in the case, or otherwise required to be there. He simply took a seat prominently in the gallery, arms crossed, staring directly at her throughout the proceedings. The message was clear. I'm watching you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Amara maintained her composure through sheer force of will, but inside she was seething. The intimidation tactics were becoming increasingly brazen. After court adjourned, she immediately called Marcus from a secure line. He showed up in my courtroom, she explained, just sat there staring at me for an hour. Document everything, Marcus advised. We're building a harassment case. But, Amara, there's something else. The Judicial Ethics Committee has accelerated their timeline. They've scheduled your hearing for next week. Next week? That's unprecedented. These reviews typically take months. Judge Foster is fast-tracking it. And here's the kicker, she's denied your request to have outside counsel present. She's claiming it's an internal administrative matter, not a legal proceeding. The systematic nature of the attack was becoming clearer by the day. Every avenue of defense was being cut off, every ally isolated. When Marcus tried to file preliminary paperwork for a civil rights case later that week, he was pulled over 3 times on his way to the federal courthouse. Each time, officers claimed routine traffic violations that mysteriously couldn't be verified later. Sophia reported that courthouse employees were being questioned about their interactions with Amara, with subtle implications that continuing to support her could impact their own careers. The message rippled through the system. Associate with Judge Richardson at your own risk. By Friday, Amara's professional world had contracted dramatically. Half her cases had been reassigned, colleagues avoided her in hallways, and even defendants seemed wary of appearing before her, fearing police retaliation by association. The system was closing ranks, isolating the perceived threat. That evening, as she tried to strategize with her dwindling circle of allies, Amara received a call from Elena, the investigative reporter. "They're coming after my sources," Elena said without preamble. "2 officers who spoke to me confidentially have been placed on administrative leave for unrelated matters. The message is clear, they're hunting for leaks." "Can you protect them?" Amara asked. "I'm trying, but they're scared. One has already recanted his statement entirely. Judge Richardson, they're not just trying to discredit you anymore. They're systematically destroying anyone who might help. Your case." As Amara hung up, she stared out her window at the darkening sky. The system she had dedicated her life to was revealing its true nature when challenged. It wasn't just a few bad actors like Hawkins. It was an entire ecosystem designed to protect power and crush dissent. For the first time, she wondered if it was a fight she could win, or if she was merely the latest in a long line of voices silenced for speaking uncomfortable truths. The weekend offered no respite from the campaign against Amara. Sunday morning, she received a frantic call from her 17-year-old son Tyler, who was spending the weekend with his father in the neighboring county following their divorce 3 years earlier. "Mom, the police just pulled me over for the 3rd time today," he said, his voice tight with restrained fear. "They made me get out of the car and they searched everything. They had dogs sniffing around. Dad is furious." Amara's heart raced. "Did they say why they stopped you?" "First time they said my taillight was out, but it wasn't. Second time they claimed I was speeding. This last time they said I matched the description of someone involved in a robbery. Mom, they knew exactly who I was. One officer asked how you were doing and said maybe you should drop your complaints if I want to keep driving." Amara closed her eyes, trying to contain her rage. "Put your father on the phone." Michael Richardson had remained on good terms with Amara after their divorce, sharing custody of Tyler amicably. A corporate attorney with his own practice, he had always maintained a respectful distance from her professional life. Now his voice vibrated with barely controlled anger. "They're targeting our son, Amara. This is crossing a line." "I know," she replied, her thoughts racing. "Can he stay with you for a while longer? I don't want him anywhere near my house right now." "Of course, but Amara, this isn't just about Tyler anymore. Someone sent me photos this morning." "Photos? Of what?" "Of your house. Close-ups of your windows, your security system, even shots. Through windows showing the inside of your living room, there was a note saying ask your ex-wife to back off." The violation struck Amara speechless. They were surveilling her home, documenting her movements, and now dragging her family into their intimidation campaign. But the worst was yet to come. That afternoon, her phone rang with a call from her 76-year-old mother, Eleanor, who lived alone in a small house across town. Eleanor's voice was shaking so badly Amara could barely understand her. "There are police everywhere," Eleanor managed between sobs. "They broke down my door, they have guns." "Mom? What's happening? Are you okay?" "They say they're looking for drugs. They have a warrant, they're tearing everything apart." "Amara, I'm scared." In the background, Amara could hear male voices shouting commands. Then a man's voice came on the line. "Ma'am, we're conducting a lawful search of these premises. Your mother will call you back when we're finished." The line went dead. Amara immediately called Marcus, who met her at her mother's house within 20 minutes. By the time they arrived, the police were gone, leaving behind a scene of deliberate destruction. Eleanor sat shell-shocked on her sofa, surrounded by overturned furniture, broken picture frames, and the contents of every drawer and cabinet dumped onto the floors. They said they had information about drug dealing from this address. Eleanor explained, still trembling. "They held me in the kitchen while they searched. Amara, one of them was that officer you told me about, Hawkins' partner. He kept asking if I'd spoken to you, if you'd told me about evidence against the department." Marcus examined the warrant, his expression darkening. "This is based on an anonymous tip with no corroborating evidence. Judge Mason signed it. He's another one of Reynolds's poker buddies. This was never about drugs. This was a message." The Sathi pattern continued through the following week. When Amara attempted to speak at a public city council meeting about police accountability, her microphone was cut after 30 seconds, and security escorted her from the building for allegedly disrupting proceedings. Online, old college photos surfaced showing her at student protests, presented out of context to paint her as a radical anti-police activist. Anonymous sources claimed she had a history of making unfounded racism accusations. Then came the medical records. Somehow someone had accessed Amara's private health information. Rumors began circulating that she was on psychiatric medication, with implications that she was mentally unstable. When she confronted the hospital about the breach, administrators promised an investigation that would likely lead nowhere. The coordinated nature of the attack suggested resources and planning far beyond what Officer Hawkins could manage alone. This was institutional, systematic, and entire power structure mobilizing to destroy a perceived threat. Tyler called again midweek. "Mom, something weird happened at school. My guidance counselor called me in to talk about recent family stress and suggested I might want to speak to someone about your issues. She mentioned rumors about your mental health. People are looking at me differently in the hallways." The attacks had now spread to her son's school environment. No aspect of her life remained untouched. When she returned home that evening, Amara found her rental car, the one she'd been using since her Mercedes remained impounded, had been keyed deeply along both sides. More troubling, when she checked underneath on a hunch, she discovered a small, magnetic GPS tracker attached to the frame. She photographed it carefully before removing it, then drove to Marcus's office to show him the evidence. "This is illegal surveillance," he said, examining the device. "We should report it." Amara laughed bitterly. "Report it to whom? The same police department that planted it?" When they did file a report at a neighboring jurisdiction's police station, the officers looked uncomfortable and suggested with straight faces that perhaps Amara had placed the tracker on her own car to bolster her harassment claims. That night, alone in her house with new deadbolts and security cameras Marcus had helped install, Amara faced the darkest moment of the ordeal so far. Every institution she had trusted had turned against her, or proven ineffective at protecting her. Her family was being targeted, her privacy violated, her reputation systemically dismantled. She thought about capitulating, dropping everything, maybe even resigning from the bench. The system clearly wanted her gone and was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to achieve that goal. She could protect her family by surrendering. But as she sat in her living room, surrounded by case files and evidence of the mounting conspiracy against her, Amara found herself returning to a fundamental principle that had guided her career. Justice matters, and systems only change when brave individuals refuse to be silenced. "They picked the wrong judge to intimidate," she whispered to herself, echoing her earlier determination. Tomorrow would bring new attacks, new violations, new attempts to break her spirit. But it would also bring another day to fight for truth, and that, she decided, was worth any cost. The breakthrough came unexpectedly on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Sophia had been meticulously cross-referencing police assignment records with the dates of judicial harassment incidents when she noticed a pattern. Officer Hawkins and 4 other officers repeatedly requested schedule changes to ensure they were on duty during specific incidents involving judges who had ruled against department interests. "It's too consistent to be coincidence," Sophia explained, spreading the documents across Marcus's conference table. They're coordinating to make sure specific officers handle specific intimidation tasks. While this discovery was significant, it wasn't enough to prove the systemic nature of the conspiracy. Then, Sophia revealed what she'd found buried in an obscure departmental email she'd accessed through a sympathetic IT worker at the courthouse. "They call themselves the Guardians," she said, displaying a partially redacted email chain. "It's an unofficial group within the department specifically targeting judges and prosecutors they consider soft on crime. And look who's listed as founding members: Hawkins and Chief Reynolds." Marcus examined the emails carefully. "This is huge, but we need more concrete evidence linking them to specific acts of intimidation." The evidence they needed arrived the next day from an unexpected source. A dispatcher from the police department reached out through Elena, the investigative reporter. She had documentation proving that the stolen vehicle report used to justify Amara's detention had been entered into the system after the stop occurred, not before. More importantly, she had audio recordings of Hawkins discussing with Chief Reynolds how to handle the Judge Richardson problem days before the incident. "I can't keep this quiet anymore," the dispatcher, Letitia Brown, told them when they met secretly at Marcus's office. "What they're doing isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. They're talking about other judges too, other prosecutors. Anyone who doesn't play by their rules becomes a target." With mounting evidence in hand, Marcus prepared emergency legal filings. Rather than pursuing departmental remedies that would likely be buried, he filed directly with the federal court, requesting an emergency injunction against the Westlake Police Department and specifically naming Hawkins and Reynolds in civil rights violations. The federal judge assigned to the case, an Obama appointee with a strong civil rights background, took the allegations seriously. After reviewing the preliminary evidence, including the dispatcher's sworn affidavit and the unaltered dashcam footage, she issued a temporary restraining order preventing Hawkins from coming within 500 feet of Amara, her family members, or the courthouse, except when specifically required to testify in cases. Meanwhile, the story had grown too big to suppress. National news outlets picked up Elena's detailed exposé on the Guardians and their systematic intimidation of judicial officials. Protest groups organized demonstrations outside the Westlake Police Department headquarters, demanding accountability. The mayor, facing increasing political pressure and concerned about the city's image, publicly called for an independent investigation. "These allegations, if true, represent a profound breach of public trust," he announced at a hastily organized press conference. "We have asked the state attorney general to appoint a special prosecutor to review all aspects of this troubling case." Within hours of the mayor's announcement, the police department issued a statement that Officer Hawkins had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Chief Reynolds, looking considerably less confident than in his previous media appearances, read a prepared statement. "The Westlake Police Department takes these allegations very seriously. We have always been committed to professionalism and equal justice under law. While we dispute many of the claims being made, we welcome a thorough and impartial investigation to clear our department's name." The Judicial Ethics Committee suddenly, aware they were now under scrutiny themselves, postponed their hearing on Amara indefinitely. Judge Foster, who had been so eager to fast-track the investigation against Amara, now claimed that additional time is needed to ensure all perspectives are properly considered. For the first time in weeks, Amara could breathe. The systematic campaign to destroy her had hit a significant roadblock. When she returned to the courthouse the following Monday, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Colleagues who had avoided her now stopped to express support, or at least acknowledge her presence. The security guards greeted her respectfully again. Her cases were quietly returned to her docket without fanfare, as if they had never been reassigned. Several city officials reached out with private apologies for not intervening sooner. The impound lot mysteriously discovered that her Mercedes could now be released. Even Judge Williams, the Chief Justice who had so quickly abandoned her, invited her to lunch to discuss how to move forward constructively. The community response was equally heartening. A group of Black attorneys organized a rally in support of her, drawing hundreds of participants carrying signs reading "Stand with Judge Richardson" and "End Police Intimidation." Local civic organizations issued statements supporting judicial independence and calling for police reform. When Amara took the bench again, her courtroom was packed with supporters. As she entered, the gallery rose in a spontaneous show of respect. For a moment she was too moved to speak, overwhelmed by the visible demonstration that the truth could still prevail against seemingly insurmountable institutional opposition. The next few days brought even more progress. The special prosecutor appointed by the Attorney General moved quickly, interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence. 3 more police dispatchers came forward with similar accounts of altered records and coordinated harassment campaigns. A former officer who had left the department years earlier confirmed the existence of the Guardians and their targeting of officials who challenged police authority. Letitia Brown, the whistleblower dispatcher, was placed under protective custody after receiving threats. Despite the intimidation, she stood firm in her testimony, providing investigators with names, dates, and detailed accounts of the conspiracy. Marcus, working with a team of civil rights attorneys that had voluntarily joined the case, filed an expanded federal lawsuit now naming 15 officers and department officials as defendants. The suit alleged a years-long pattern of civil rights violations targeting not just Amara, but dozens of officials and community members who had challenged police practices. For the first time, it appeared that real accountability might be possible. The wall of silence that had protected the department for so long was cracking, with new witnesses coming forward daily. There was talk of a Justice Department pattern and practice, investigation that could lead to federal oversight of the department. In a private moment in her chambers, Amara allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic. "They thought they could break me," she told Sophia. "They didn't realize that sometimes, when you try to destroy someone, you only make them stronger." Sophia smiled. "The truth has a way of coming to light, just like you told Hawkins that night." "It's not over," Amara cautioned. "Systems like this don't change easily. There will be pushback, attempts to minimize what happened, pressure to settle quietly. But we've created a record now," Sophia pointed out. "Evidence that can't be buried or denied. Whatever happens next, the truth is out there." That evening, Amara finally felt secure enough to invite Tyler and her mother to her home for dinner, the first family gathering since the ordeal began. As they shared a meal and cautiously discussed the future, the weight of the past weeks seemed to lift slightly. There was still a long road ahead, but the isolation and helplessness of the initial onslaught had been broken. Later, after Tyler and Eleanor had gone, Amara sat on her porch in the cool evening air, reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. The system had nearly crushed her, but now there was a real chance for meaningful change. Perhaps her ordeal would lead to protections for others, preventing future abuses of power. She was still deep in thought when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it, she felt ice form in her veins. The message contained a single line: "This isn't over. The real payback starts tomorrow." As she stared at the screen, Amara realized her instincts had been right. What she had experienced so far had just been the opening moves in a much larger and more dangerous game. The forces aligned against her had been temporarily set back, but they hadn't surrendered. And now, having failed to intimidate her through institutional means, they might resort to more desperate and violent measures. The temporary victory, she realized, might have only raised the stakes. Can you imagine fighting a system that refuses to lose? What would you do if the moment you thought victory was in sight, your enemies struck back with unimaginable force? For Judge Amara Richardson, the brief taste of vindication was about to turn bitter as her opponents unleashed their most devastating attacks yet. The counteroffensive began exactly 3 days after Amara returned to the bench. She was midway through afternoon hearings when her bailiff approached with an urgent message. Tyler had been arrested at his high school, allegedly found with drugs, in his locker during a random search. The school resource officer who conducted the search and made the arrest was Officer Craig Daniels, a close friend of Hawkins and a suspected member of the Guardians. Amara immediately recused herself from the ongoing case and rushed to the juvenile detention center, only to find that Tyler had already been processed and transferred to adult holding facilities, despite being only 17. When she arrived at the main jail, she was informed that as the parent of the accused, she would need to wait like any other family member. No special treatment would be granted because of her judicial position. After 3 hours in a crowded waiting area under the hostile stares of officers who clearly recognized her, Amara was finally allowed to see her son. Tyler's face was bruised, his school clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit. "They planted it, Mom," he said immediately, his voice low. "I never touched any drugs." The officer came directly to my locker, like he knew exactly where to look. When I protested, he slammed me against the wall. "Said to tell you this is what happens when you mess with the wrong people." Amara fought to maintain composure. "We'll fight this, Tyler. We have good attorneys." "There's more," Tyler continued. "They took my phone and went through everything. They kept asking about your case, what evidence you have, who's helping you." As Amara left the detention center, she called Marcus, only to have the call go straight to voicemail. She tried his office and was met with a shocking response. Marcus's law office was being raided by police at that very moment. Officers armed with a search warrant claiming evidence of witness tampering had stormed the premises, seizing computers, files, and phones, particularly targeting all materials related to Amara's case. By the time Amara arrived at the scene, the damage was done. Police cruisers surrounded the building, and officers were carrying boxes of documents to their vehicles. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, prevented from entering his own office, watching helplessly as years of sensitive client information was carried away. "They're claiming an anonymous tip about fabricated evidence," he told her, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "This is about destroying our case files and identifying our witnesses. Nothing more." The coordinated attack continued throughout the day. Letitia Brown, the dispatcher whistleblower, called Elena in panic. "They came to my sister's house where I've been staying," she explained. "They threatened to arrest her for harboring a fugitive, claimed there was a warrant out for me for evidence tampering. They said they know where my kids go to school. I can't do this anymore. My family comes first." By evening, Letitia had publicly recanted her testimony, claiming she had been confused about the timeline of events and had misinterpreted conversations she overheard. The previously brave whistleblower now appeared on local news looking terrified, reading what was clearly a prepared statement, absolving the department of any wrongdoing. The next morning brought another devastating blow. Sophia was fired from her clerk position for unauthorized access to confidential records. Security escorted her from the building while colleagues watched in stunned silence. The message was clear: support Judge Richardson, and your career will be destroyed. As Amara prepared for an emergency hearing regarding Tyler's case, Chief Reynolds held a press conference that delivered perhaps the most personal attack yet. "In light of recent developments, I feel it's my duty to express concerns about Judge Richardson's fitness to serve," he stated with false solemnity. "Information has come to our attention indicating that Judge Richardson has previously sought treatment for anxiety and emotional distress following her divorce. While we respect medical privacy, when such conditions may impact a judge's decision-making and perception of reality, the public has a right to know." Amara watched in horror as Reynolds strategically revealed details from her private medical records that had been illegally obtained and completely distorted. He painted a picture of mental instability, subtly suggesting that her claims of harassment were delusions stemming from psychological issues. Before she could respond publicly, Judge Foster, the same ethics committee chair who had initially fast-tracked the complaint against her, issued an emergency gag order preventing Amara from making any public statements about ongoing investigations. The order specifically barred her from responding to Reynolds' allegations about her mental health, claiming it could prejudice ongoing investigations. Even the independent investigator appointed by the Attorney General was compromised. News reports revealed that the independent prosecutor had previously served as legal counsel to the police union in 3 different cities. Despite clear conflict of interest, he refused to recuse himself, insisting he could remain impartial. The final blow came that afternoon. Judge Williams summoned Amara to his chambers, where representatives from the State Judicial Commission waited. Without preamble, Williams handed her an official notice of suspension. "In light of the serious allegations regarding your son's arrest and questions about your medical fitness, you are suspended from the bench pending resolution of all investigations," he stated formally. "This is administrative, not punitive. Your salary will continue." "This is blatant retaliation," Amara responded, struggling to maintain her professional demeanor. My son was framed. My medical records were illegally accessed and distorted. This suspension is exactly what Hawkins and Reynolds wanted from the beginning. Williams wouldn't meet her eyes. The commission has made its decision, Amara. Security. We'll escort you to collect your personal items. Your cases will be reassigned effective immediately. As Amara was led from the courthouse through a side entrance to avoid the press, Chief Reynolds gave another statement to the gathered media. No one is above the law, not even judges who think they are. Today's suspension of Judge Richardson demonstrates our system's commitment to holding everyone accountable, regardless of position or power. The speed and coordination of the counterattack left Amara reeling. In less than 48 hours, her son had been arrested on fabricated charges. Her chief ally's office raided, her key witness intimidated into recanting, her clerk fired, her medical history exploited, her right to public speech curtailed, and her judicial position suspended. The message was unmistakable. The system would destroy anything and anyone necessary to protect itself. That night, alone in her home, Amara faced her darkest moment. The forces aligned against her had proven more powerful and less constrained by law or ethics than she had anticipated. They had targeted her son, his future, now jeopardized by false charges. They had isolated her from allies and support systems. They had weaponized her private information against her. For a moment, surrender seemed the only rational option. She could drop everything, accept a quiet resignation, take a deal that would likely be offered to dismiss the charges against Tyler in exchange for her silence and departure from the bench. But as she sat in the darkness, Amara remembered her mother's words from decades earlier, when she had faced discrimination as one of the few black female law students at her university. Justice delayed is still justice, but justice abandoned is justice denied forever. The path forward wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: she wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for Tyler, for Sophia, for Marcus, for Letitia, and for countless others who had been or would be victimized by this corrupt system. Surrender wasn't an option, but neither was fighting within the rules of a system designed to ensure she would lose. If she wanted justice now, she would need to find another way forward, a path outside the institutions that had failed her so completely. Have you ever felt the system was rigged against you? Comment number 1 if you believe we should never give up fighting for justice, even when the odds seem impossible. Hit that like button if you're shocked by how quickly those in power can coordinate to crush someone who threatens their authority. And subscribe to stay updated on the next part of Judge Richardson's fight against a corrupt system that will stop at nothing to silence her. As Amara stared at the phone that had delivered so many threatening messages, she wondered, what moves were left when your opponents controlled the entire board? The answer would come from an unexpected source, and it would change everything. The systematic isolation of Judge Amara Richardson continued with ruthless efficiency in the days following her suspension. Former colleagues who had cautiously resumed contact after her temporary victory now vanished completely. Emails went unanswered, calls unreturned. In the courthouse where she had served for 15 years, her name was already being removed from the directory and her office reassigned to a visiting judge. The Bar Association, which had initially expressed concerns about her situation, issued a carefully worded statement about respecting ongoing investigations and maintaining the integrity of the judiciary, language that deliberately avoided taking any position supporting her. When Marcus attempted to organize a press conference with other attorneys to address the coordinated retaliation, only 3 lawyers showed up, all from small practices with little institutional power. Even financial pressure began to mount. Amara received a notification from her bank that her accounts were subject to an audit triggered by suspicious activity reports, a common harassment tactic used by law enforcement to create financial pressure on targets. Her mortgage lender suddenly required additional verification documentation for payments, despite years of perfect payment history. These weren't coincidences, but coordinated attempts to strain every aspect of her life. The few supporters who remained faced their own consequences. The community organizers who had rallied outside her home received anonymous threatening calls. The elderly neighbor who had brought food received multiple parking tickets outside her own home. Supporters who had spoken out on social media found themselves subject to online harassment campaigns from accounts that mysteriously disappeared after delivering their attacks. Tyler, released on bail that had been deliberately set unusually high, discovered that his college scholarship had been mysteriously withdrawn due to character concerns. His high school principal, who had initially defended him, now suggested he might consider alternative education options to avoid disrupting other students. The isolation strategy extended to media coverage as well. The journalists who had covered her story favorably were reassigned to different beats or found their stories buried on back pages. Elena, the investigative reporter who had broken much of the story, found herself locked out of her newspaper's content management system, her building access revoked over an unspecified security concern. Even Marcus, resilient as he was, faced mounting pressure. His law partners called an emergency meeting to discuss the reputational risk his involvement in Amara's case posed to their firm. Clients were receiving calls suggesting they might face additional scrutiny from regulatory agencies if they continued working with Marcus's firm. The message was clear. Association with Amara Richardson had become toxic. When Marcus attempted to file a federal civil rights case on Amara's behalf, they encountered another institutional roadblock. Judge after judge in the district recused themselves, citing prior professional relationships or vague conflicts of interest that prevented them from hearing the case. The matter was eventually assigned to a semi-retired visiting judge known for his pro-law enforcement leanings, virtually guaranteeing an unsympathetic hearing. At home, Amara discovered that the security cameras she had installed had been disabled during a brief power outage targeted specifically to her block. More disturbing still, she received an envelope containing photographs clearly taken from inside her house while she was away: the kitchen, her bedroom, her home office. No message accompanied the photos. None was needed. The implication was clear. Nowhere was safe. They could reach her anywhere. The final personal blow came when Eleanor, Amara's mother, suffered a stroke brought on by the stress of the ongoing harassment. As Amara sat by her hospital bedside, holding her unconscious mother's hand, she felt the weight of guilt crushing down on her. Her pursuit of justice had endangered everyone she loved. Eleanor had been her moral compass, her unwavering support through every challenge. Now she lay unresponsive, another casualty in a battle that seemed increasingly unwinnable. In the hospital corridor, Amara encountered Michael, her ex-husband, who had come to check on Eleanor's condition. Despite their amicable co-parenting relationship, the strain was evident in his tight expression. "This has to stop, Amara," he said quietly. "Tyler's facing felony charges. Your mother's in critical condition. Your career is in shambles. When is enough enough? You think I should just give up?" she asked, too exhausted for anger. "Let them win? I think you should consider what winning even looks like at this point," Michael replied. "Reynolds sent someone to talk to me. They're offering a deal. Tyler's charges dropped. Your mother gets the best care available. You receive full pension, benefits. All you have to do is resign quietly and sign a non-disclosure agreement." The offer was tempting in her moment of weakness. She could protect her family, maintain financial security, and escape the relentless pressure. The alternative was continuing a fight that grew more desperate by the day, with diminishing resources and mounting personal costs. "I need time to think," she told Michael, turning back toward her mother's room. "Don't take too long," he cautioned. They said the offer expires in 48 hours. That night, sitting alone in the hospital waiting room while nurses attended to Eleanor, Amara faced the most difficult decision of her life. The system had methodically stripped away every source of support, every resource, every ally. They had demonstrated the ability and willingness to harm those she loved most. Perhaps Michael was right. Perhaps winning now meant securing the best possible terms of surrender. As dawn broke, Amara had nearly convinced herself to accept the deal. She would call Michael, tell him to arrange the meeting with Reynolds's representatives. She would sign whatever they put in front of her, accept professional disgrace if it meant safety for Tyler and care for Eleanor. She was reaching for her phone when a text message arrived from an unknown number. "Parking garage, level 3, blue sedan, 10 minutes. Come alone, I have what you need." Every instinct warned her it could be a trap, yet something in the directness of the message suggested otherwise. After a moment's hesitation, she left her purse but took her phone, making her way to the hospital parking structure. On level 3, a nondescript blue sedan sat idling in a corner space, windows tinted beyond legal limits. As she approached, cautiously, the passenger window lowered just enough to reveal a young man's face, partially obscured by a baseball cap and glasses. "Judge Richardson," he said quietly. "I'm Officer James Carter. I was at your house that night with Hawkins. I can't do this anymore. Please get in. I have something you need to see." Amara hesitated, weighing the risk. Then, deciding she had little left to lose, she opened the door and slipped into the passenger seat, coming face to face with the man who might represent her last hope for justice. Officer James Carter was younger than Amara had expected, barely 30, with the nervous energy of someone carrying a burden too heavy for his years. As they drove away from the hospital, taking a circuitous route to avoid potential surveillance, he explained his involvement and why he had decided to break ranks. "I joined the force to help people," he said, checking the rearview mirror frequently. "My dad was a cop in Boston, always taught me about integrity, about protecting the community. What's happening in Westlake isn't protection, it's corruption." Carter had been assigned to Hawkins as a junior officer 18 months earlier. Initially impressed by the veteran's record, he had gradually become disturbed by the selective enforcement, the fabricated probable cause for searches in certain neighborhoods, and ultimately, the coordinated harassment of officials who challenged department practices. "The Guardians aren't just a few bad officers," Carter explained, turning down a residential street to avoid main thoroughfares. "It's a system. Chief Reynolds runs it. They identify targets, judges, prosecutors, community leaders who don't fall in line. Then they deploy resources to neutralize those targets." "Why come forward now?" Amara asked, still wary of a potential setup. Carter's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "They crossed a line with your son. I was there when they planned it. Hawkins and Daniels joking about how they'd plant the evidence, how they'd make sure the charges stuck. I joined to uphold the law, not to frame innocent kids." He pulled into an abandoned grocery store parking lot and cut the engine. "I can't keep wearing the badge and be part of this. But if I just quit, nothing changes. So I've been gathering evidence." From beneath his seat, Carter retrieved a thumb drive. "I've been collecting for months. Body cam footage that was supposedly deleted but that I copied first. Recordings of Guardian meetings where they specifically discussed targeting black judges and prosecutors. Text messages about fabricating evidence. And this?" He pulled out his phone and played a video that made Amara's breath catch. It showed Officers Daniels and another officer she didn't recognize clearly planting small bags of white powder in a school locker while the hallway was empty. "That's Tyler's locker from 2 days ago," Carter confirmed. "I wasn't directly involved, but I knew it was happening. I set my phone to record when they didn't notice." Amara stared at the device in her hand, emotions warring between vindication and rage. "Why didn't you stop them?" "And do what?" Carter asked bitterly. "Get myself fired or worse before I could gather enough evidence? This goes beyond Hawkins and Reynolds. There are connections to the prosecutor's office, judges like Foster, business leaders who benefit from selective enforcement. It's a network." The thumb drive contained hours of damning evidence. Footage of Hawkins and other officers explicitly discussing their harassment campaign against Amara before her traffic stop. Chief Reynolds instructing officers on how to circumvent, accountability measures, deleting records, and coordinating witness intimidation. Most disturbing were recordings of meetings where they strategized targeting other officials who had challenged department practices, the systemic nature of the corruption laid bare. "I can't go through official channels with this," Carter said. "Internal affairs is compromised. Reynolds has his people there. The state police have a mutual aid agreement with Westlake. They won't touch this. Federal authorities would need someone inside to corroborate everything, and that means I'd have to go public. You're taking an enormous risk even talking to me," Amara observed. Carter nodded grimly. "I started looking over my shoulder the day I realized what was happening. Last week, my supervisor suddenly wanted to review all my body cam footage, asked why I was talking to certain officers. They suspect something. I don't think I have much time before they figure out I'm the leak. They discussed options for nearly an hour, with Carter becoming increasingly agitated as they talked. I have a cousin in Philadelphia. I'm heading there, tonight, staying off the grid for a while. The evidence is yours now. I'll testify if it comes to that. But we both know they'll do everything possible to discredit me, call me a disgruntled employee, or worse. Before they parted, Carter provided one final piece of information. There's a leak in the federal prosecutor's office, someone feeding information to Reynolds. That's how they've stayed ahead of you at every turn. Don't trust anyone in official channels with this evidence until you know exactly who you're dealing with. As Carter drove away, Amara clutched the thumb drive containing evidence that could vindicate her and expose the entire corrupt system. But she also understood the enormity of the challenge ahead. With official channels potentially compromised and her allies under surveillance, she couldn't simply turn the evidence over to authorities and trust the system to work. She needed to authenticate the evidence properly, protect Officer Carter, and find a pathway to justice that couldn't be blocked by Reynolds and his network. The thumb drive was a potential lifeline, but leveraging it effectively would require careful strategy and perfect timing. Returning to the hospital, Amara found Marcus waiting in Eleanor's room. She discreetly showed him the thumb drive and whispered Carter's name. "We need to verify everything on here and create secure backup copies," Marcus murmured. "And we need to find Carter a good lawyer. He's taking an enormous risk." "He's already gone underground," Amara replied. "Said he's heading to Philadelphia, but I don't know if that's his real destination." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Smart. If we don't know where he is, we can't reveal it under pressure. Let me take the drive. I know a tech expert who can authenticate the metadata without leaving digital fingerprints. We need to establish chain of custody documentation in case they claim the evidence was fabricated." As Marcus left with the precious evidence, Amara sat beside her still unconscious mother, holding her hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt something beyond despair. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor, determination. The system that had nearly crushed her had finally made a fatal mistake. Someone on the inside had broken ranks, and that crack in the wall of silence might be enough to bring down the entire corrupt structure. Eleanor's fingers twitched slightly in her grasp, and Amara leaned forward. "I'm still fighting, Mom," she whispered. "And now, finally, we might have a chance to win." Dawn was breaking when Amara's phone rang, pulling her from the light sleep she'd fallen into at her mother's bedside. It was Marcus, his voice tight with urgency. "They know about Carter," he said without preamble. "It's all over police radio. They're calling him armed and dangerous, claiming he stole evidence and assaulted another officer. They've got a department-wide manhunt underway." Amara's heart sank. "They moved faster than we expected. Have you verified the evidence yet?" "My contact worked through the night. The footage is authentic timestamps, geolocation data, everything. Checks out. This is ironclad proof of conspiracy and corruption. But Amara, there's something else. Hawkins has been reinstated to active duty. His suspension was lifted yesterday through some procedural maneuver, and now he's leading the search for Carter." The implications were clear. If Hawkins found Carter first, the evidence might never see the light of day, and the whistleblower's safety was far from guaranteed. They needed to locate him before the department did. "We can't contact him directly. His phone is almost certainly being monitored," Amara reasoned. "And we can't trust official channels to protect him." Marcus agreed. "I've made backup copies of everything. We need to move quickly on two fronts: find Carter and get this evidence to someone who can't be intimidated or silenced by Reynolds." Over the next 24 hours, Amara and Marcus executed a careful strategy to evade the surveillance they assumed was in place. Using burner phones and meeting in public locations where they could detect anyone following them, they coordinated their approach. Marcus reached out to contacts in the federal prosecutor's office in a neighboring district, seeking someone without connections to the Westlake power structure. Amara, meanwhile, tried to think like Carter. Where would a hunted police officer go if he couldn't trust his own department? The answer came unexpectedly from Tyler. "Mom, I just remembered something," he said during a brief hospital visit. "When the officers were searching my locker, Carter was standing back, looking uncomfortable. He mentioned something about how he used to fish with his dad at some cabin. Said it was the only place he could truly think clearly. I thought he was just making conversation to seem less involved. Amara froze. A cabin? Did he say where? Tyler thought hard. Something about Crystal Lake? He said it was his family's place, but nobody used it anymore since his dad passed. The Richardson family had their own modest cabin on Crystal Lake, a small vacation property Eleanor had inherited decades earlier. They hadn't used it much in recent years, but Amara still maintained it. If Carter had been trying to send a subtle message to Tyler, knowing the information might eventually reach Amara, it was a brilliant move, one that couldn't be traced through digital communications. As Amara contemplated this possibility, her phone rang with an unknown number. Answering cautiously, she heard Tyler's friend Jason speaking rapidly. "Mrs. Richardson, Tyler asked me to call you. He went up to your family cabin to get something he left there last summer. But he just texted me there's someone already there and he thinks it's that officer everyone's looking for. He's scared to leave." Amara's pulse quickened. Tyler had apparently made the connection himself and gone to investigate without telling her, likely to protect her from knowledge that could compromise her. But now both Tyler and potentially Carter were at the cabin, with a police manhunt underway. "Tell Tyler to stay calm and not approach the person. I'm coming right away," she instructed, already grabbing her keys. She called Marcus, explaining the situation as she headed to her car. "I need to get there before Hawkins figures it out. Can you keep working the federal angle? We need someone ready to receive the evidence and testimony." "Already on it," Marcus confirmed. "I've arranged a meeting with a federal prosecutor from the Eastern District, willing to meet us outside Westlake jurisdiction. But Amara, be careful. Hawkins was asking questions about your lake property this morning. One of my sources in dispatch overheard him." The race had begun. Amara drove as fast as she dared toward Crystal Lake, about 90 minutes outside the city. She took deliberate detours and back roads, watching carefully for any signs of surveillance or pursuit. Halfway there, she spotted a police cruiser in her rearview mirror and felt her heart rate spike, but the officer turned off at the next intersection. When her regular phone lost signal in the rural area approaching the lake, she was almost relieved. It meant she was temporarily untraceable through normal means, but it also meant she couldn't contact Tyler or Marcus until she regained coverage. As she navigated the final winding road to the cabin, Amara caught sight of Tyler's car hidden poorly behind some trees near the property. At least he had shown some caution. She parked her own vehicle in a similar concealed location and approached on foot, scanning the area for any sign of police presence. The cabin appeared quiet from the outside, but smoke curled from the chimney. Despite the mild spring weather, someone was definitely inside and wanted to stay warm. Moving cautiously to the side window, Amara peered inside and saw Tyler sitting tensely at the kitchen table across from Officer Carter, who looked exhausted and disheveled, a duffel bag at his feet. She tapped quietly on the window, causing both men to startle. Tyler rushed to let her in, embracing her with relief. "Mom, Officer Carter showed up last night. He said he knew this place because his family used to rent a cabin nearby when he was a kid. He remembered our name on the mailbox." Carter stood, looking simultaneously relieved and terrified. "Judge Richardson, I'm sorry to involve your family like this, but every place I tried was being watched. I thought this might be temporary until I could figure out my next move." "You did the right thing," Amara assured him, quickly explaining what they had learned from the evidence and their plans to connect with federal prosecutors. Carter nodded grimly. "The situation is worse than I initially told you. After I left you, I discovered Hawkins had convinced Reynolds to issue a fraudulent warrant for my arrest. They're painting me as mentally unstable, claiming I fabricated evidence because I was denied a promotion. They'll kill me before they let me testify." The severity of his statement hung in the air. These weren't just corrupt officers, they were desperate men with everything to lose if the truth came out. Their planning was interrupted by Tyler, who had been watching through the front window. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with fear. "There are cars coming up the road, police cars." Moving to the window, Amara saw with horror that 3 police cruisers were approaching slowly, their roof lights off, but their presence unmistakable. Leading them in an unmarked car was a vehicle she recognized immediately, Hawkins's personal SUV. "They found us," Carter whispered, retrieving his service weapon from his bag. "They must have tracked your son's phone or vehicle." Amara quickly assessed their options. The cabin had only 2 exits: the front door and a back door leading to the lake. There was no realistic escape route with multiple officers approaching. They were effectively surrounded. "We need to stall them," she decided. "Marcus is meeting with the federal prosecutor today. If we can hold out long enough for him to get protection ordered." Carter shook his head. "They won't wait. Once they confirm I'm here, they'll come in shooting if necessary. They'll claim I was resisting arrest, that I drew my weapon first. It'll be 3 of us against at least 5 of them, and their version will be the official record." As the vehicles stopped outside and officers began to deploy in tactical positions around the cabin, Amara realized they had run out of options and time. The confrontation she had hoped to avoid was now inevitable. Hawkins and his men had found them, and whatever happened next would determine not just her fate, but the possibility of justice itself. Through the cabin's front window, Amara could see Hawkins directing officers to surround the structure. Unlike a normal police operation, there was no bullhorn announcement, no demand for surrender, just armed officers taking positions with an eerie, practiced precision that suggested this wasn't an arrest but something far more sinister. "They're not following protocol," Carter observed grimly, peering through a side window. "No announcement, no negotiator. They're setting up a scenario where they can claim they were fired upon and responded with justified force." Tyler, his face pale with fear, looked to his mother. "What do we do?" Amara's mind raced through options, each seeming more desperate than the last. Then she remembered something from the evidence Carter had provided: a contingency plan she could now leverage. "Your body cam," she said, suddenly turning to Carter. "Do you still have it?" He nodded, reaching into his duffel bag. "Standard issue. I kept it when I left." "Is it functional? Can it live stream?" "Yes, it connects to the department server automatically when activated. That's why I haven't turned it on. They could track the signal." Amara's eyes lit with determination. "That's exactly what we need, but we won't connect to their server." She quickly outlined her plan. While department body cams normally stream to secure police servers, Darius, the tech expert who had been helping them, had shown her how activists had modified similar cameras to stream to independent servers or even social media platforms. If they could reconfigure Carter's camera to broadcast publicly, they could create witnesses to whatever happened next. Using Tyler's phone, which still had signal, they called Darius, putting him on speaker while keeping voices low. "I need to override a police body cam to stream publicly," Amara explained rapidly. "Is it possible?" "Model number?" Darius asked without hesitation. Carter read off the specifications and Darius whistled. "That's their newest system. Tougher but not impossible. I'll need to talk you through a firmware override." For the next 10 minutes, while Hawkins continued positioning his team outside, Carter followed Darius's technical instructions, using a paperclip and Tyler's phone to access the camera's debugging mode and alter its streaming destination. "It's set," Darius finally confirmed. "When you activate it, it'll broadcast to a public stream. I've got it configured to simultaneously push to multiple platforms, major social media, news feeds, everything. Even if they try to shut it down, the footage will already be distributed." Outside, Hawkins's voice finally came through a megaphone. "James Carter, we know you're in there. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." "Now or never," Amara said as Carter activated the body cam and secured it to his chest pocket. "Stream active," Darius confirmed through the phone. "We're already getting viewers." With the camera running, capturing everything, Amara moved toward the door. "I'm going out first. I'm the one they really want." "Mom, no!" Tyler protested. "It's our best chance," she insisted. "They can't simply gun down a judge on a live stream. And with the camera running, we have a record of whatever happens next." Before anyone could further object, Amara opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch, hands raised high. "Officer Hawkins," she called out clearly. "This is Judge Amara Richardson. I am unarmed. There is no need for this level of force." Through the trees, She could see Hawkins's momentary surprise at her appearance. He had clearly expected Carter to emerge first. "Judge Richardson," he called back, lowering the megaphone slightly. "Step aside. This is a police operation to apprehend a dangerous fugitive." "Officer James Carter is not dangerous or a fugitive," Amara replied, her voice carrying across the clearing. "He is a whistleblower with evidence of departmental corruption. Evidence that includes your illegal surveillance of my family, the fabrication of charges against my son, and the coordinated harassment campaign against judicial officials." Hawkins's face hardened. "Step aside, Judge, or you'll be arrested for harboring a fugitive and obstruction of justice." Behind her, the door opened again, and Carter stepped out, the body cam prominently visible on his chest. "All officers present," he called out clearly. "Be advised that this interaction is being recorded and live-streamed to the public, not to department servers." This announcement created visible confusion among the officers positioned around the cabin. Several exchanged uncertain glances, clearly not having been informed of the full situation. Hawkins, however, grew more agitated. "Carter, deactivate that camera immediately. That's a direct order." "I no longer recognize your authority, Officer Hawkins," Carter replied steadily. "Not since I witnessed you and Chief Reynolds orchestrate the framing of an innocent teenager, the intimidation of witnesses, and the systematic harassment of public officials who challenged your misconduct." Tyler had now joined them on the porch, forming a unified front. Hawkins, seeing the situation spiraling out of his control, made a critical error. He advanced toward the cabin, weapon drawn. "This ends now," he growled, his careful professional mask finally slipping. "Give me that camera and the evidence you stole, Carter. Nobody needs to get hurt." "Are you threatening us with deadly force, Officer Hawkins?" Amara asked clearly, aware of the live-streaming audience. "While being recorded? Is that standard department procedure?" "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Hawkins snarled, now close enough that the body cam could capture every detail of his expression. "Do you think this ends with me? The Guardians have connections throughout the system, judges, prosecutors, business leaders. You'll never win." "Are you acknowledging the existence of the Guardians, officer?" Carter asked. "The secret organization within the department that targets officials who don't comply with your demands?" Hawkins seemed to suddenly realize he was being led into damaging admissions on a public live stream. His expression shifted, but instead of backing down, he doubled down, perhaps believing he could still control the narrative if he eliminated the evidence. "Give me the camera and any other evidence now," he demanded, raising his weapon higher. "That's department property you've stolen." From the trees, several officers began to approach, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. One called out, "Blake, what's going on? This doesn't look like a standard arrest." "Stay in position," Hawkins snapped without turning. "Carter is manipulating the situation." "They don't know, do they?" Amara realized aloud. "Your officers don't know what this is really about. They think this is a legitimate operation to arrest a fellow officer." Indeed, the expressions of confusion among the other officers suggested they hadn't been fully briefed. They had been told this was a standard, if high-risk arrest of a fellow officer gone rogue, not an operation to silence a whistleblower and destroy evidence. Carter seized the opening. "To all officers present," he announced clearly, "I have evidence that Officer Hawkins, Chief Reynolds, and others have been engaged in systematic corruption, including fabricating evidence against Judge Richardson's son, illegal surveillance, witness intimidation, and targeted harassment of judicial officials who ruled against department interests. I am not resisting arrest, I am seeking federal whistleblower protection." The effect was immediate. Two officers lowered their weapons slightly, exchanging concerned glances. Another stepped back, clearly wanting no part of what was unfolding, if Carter's claims were true. Hawkins, seeing his control of the situation crumbling, made a desperate choice. He lunged forward, reaching for the body cam on Carter's chest. "Give me that camera now." In the ensuing struggle, Hawkins's weapon discharged a shot that would have struck Amara directly if Carter hadn't pushed her aside, taking the bullet in his shoulder. The sound of the gunshot froze everyone momentarily as Carter fell back against the cabin wall, blood spreading across his uniform shirt. "Officer down," someone shouted, and chaos erupted. Several officers rushed forward not to assist Hawkins, but to provide aid to the wounded Carter. Others turned their weapons toward Hawkins, suddenly uncertain who represented the true threat. "He attacked me," Hawkins shouted, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Carter went for my weapon." "That's a lie," Tyler called out, his phone raised, having recorded the entire encounter from a different angle. "You fired at my mother and Officer Carter saved her life." The standoff might have descended into further violence if not for the sudden arrival of additional vehicles, sirens blaring, lights flashing. But these weren't Westlake police cruisers. They were federal agents, their jackets clearly marked FBI as they poured from their vehicles, weapons drawn. "Federal agents, everyone lower your weapons," commanded a senior agent, approaching with tactical precision. "This location is now under federal jurisdiction by order of the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District." Marcus emerged from one of the vehicles accompanied by a woman in a suit, whom Amara recognized as Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Knowles, known for her successful prosecutions of public corruption cases. "All local officers are instructed to stand down," Knowles announced authoritatively. "This is now a federal investigation into civil rights violations and public corruption." The federal agents quickly took control of the scene, separating the officers and securing Hawkins, who continued to protest that he was conducting a legitimate police operation. Medical personnel rushed to Carter, who despite his injury insisted that his body cam be secured as evidence. As agents created a perimeter, Marcus made his way to Amara and Tyler, embracing them both. "We got to the federal prosecutor just in time," he explained. When she saw the evidence Carter provided, she immediately petitioned a federal judge for emergency jurisdiction. The live stream helped tremendously accelerated everything. When they saw what was happening in real time, Amara watched as Hawkins was placed in handcuffs, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. Other officers, now understanding the true nature of the situation, were cooperating with federal agents, some already providing statements that suggested they had been misled about the purpose of the operation. As Carter was loaded into an ambulance, Amara approached him. "Thank you," she said simply, clasping his hand. "You risked everything for the truth." He smiled weakly through his pain. "I just wanted to be the kind of officer my father would have been proud of. The kind this community deserves." The federal takeover of the scene marked a turning point in the entire case. What Hawkins had intended as an operation to silence witnesses and destroy evidence had instead become the most damning evidence against him and the corrupt system he represented, all broadcast live to thousands of viewers across multiple platforms. The truth had finally broken through the wall of silence, and the reckoning that would follow would reach far beyond one corrupt officer or even one police department. 6 months later, Amara Richardson sat in an unfamiliar judicial chamber, arranging personal items on her new desk. The view from her window encompassed not the familiar skyline of Westlake, but the imposing architecture of the federal courthouse, downtown. The nameplate on her door read, "The Honorable Amara Richardson, U.S. District Court, Eastern District," a position she had never sought, but now embraced as an unexpected outcome of her ordeal. The investigation that began that day at EUM's Crystal Lake had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, revealing corruption that permeated multiple levels of Westlake's justice system. Chief Reynolds and 17 officers faced federal charges ranging from civil rights violations to witness tampering, evidence fabrication, and conspiracy. Judge Foster had resigned in disgrace when text messages revealed her coordinated efforts to fast-track ethics complaints against judges who ruled against police interests. Amara traced her fingers over a framed newspaper article on her wall. The headline read, "Justice Department announces nationwide police reform initiative based on Westlake findings." Her personal nightmare had catalyzed institutional changes that would potentially protect countless others from similar abuses of power. A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. Her clerk, a new hire, as Sophia had accepted a prestigious position with the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, announced, "Your first case is ready, Judge Richardson. The attorneys are assembled." Amara nodded, donning her new judicial robe. As she prepared to enter her courtroom for the first time as a federal judge, she recalled the journey that had brought her here. The false arrest, the public humiliation, The attacks on her family, the isolation, and the desperate final confrontation, all steps on a painful path that had ultimately led to a position where she could effect even greater change. Her new courtroom fell silent as she entered, the gallery packed with observers for this historic first session. Among the spectators, she spotted familiar faces. Marcus, now heading a Justice Department task force on judicial independence. Sophia, whose testimony had been crucial in mapping the connections between corrupt officials. Tyler, who had just started a youth advocacy program for teens wrongfully targeted by police. And Eleanor, fully recovered and beaming with pride from the front row. Officer James Carter sat nearby, now protected under the federal witness program, while continuing to provide crucial testimony in ongoing corruption trials. His shoulder had healed, though he would never wear a police uniform again. Instead, he had become a key advisor to the commission implementing reforms in departments nationwide. But it was the figure seated at the defense table that truly emphasized how far they had come. Blake Hawkins, no longer in his blue uniform but in prison orange, awaited arraignment on federal charges. The case had been specially assigned to Amara's docket, a symbolic acknowledgement that justice sometimes comes full circle. As Amara gazed down at the man who had once held a gun to her head, she felt no personal satisfaction or vindication. Instead, she experienced something more profound, the solemn weight of a system slowly healing itself, reimagining what justice could look like when accountability applied to everyone, regardless of power or position. "Court is now in session," announced the bailiff. "The United States versus Blake Hawkins and others." Amara's voice was clear and steady as she addressed the courtroom. These proceedings mark not just the trial of individual defendants, but a reckoning with systemic failures that allowed abuse to flourish. Let the record reflect that this court is committed to equal justice under law, not merely as an inscription on our buildings, but as a living principle in our daily practice. The dashcam footage from that rainy night when Hawkins had first detained her claiming her car was stolen had become a training tool for police departments across the country, an example of how quickly power could corrupt when wielded without accountability. The body cam footage from the cabin confrontation was now shown in law schools in courses on ethics and civil rights. Most significantly, Amara's experience had shaped new legislation bearing her name, the Richardson Act, which established independent oversight mechanisms for police departments and created specific protections against intimidation of judicial officers. The system had tried to break her for being a black woman who dared to hold power, but instead, she had transformed it. As the proceedings began, Amara observed Hawkins carefully. The arrogance that had once defined him had dissolved, replaced by the hollow recognition that he had not merely lost a battle with one judge, but had catalyzed the dismantling of an entire corrupt ecosystem he had helped build. He could not meet her gaze. "Mr. Hawkins," she addressed him directly, "you stand accused of multiple federal crimes, including conspiracy against rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, and witness tampering. These are serious charges that strike at the heart of our justice system. How do you plead?" For a moment, the courtroom held its breath. Then Hawkins, whose defiance had finally been broken by the weight of irrefutable evidence and abandoned by his once powerful allies, spoke the words few had expected to hear. "Guilty, Your Honor." A murmur ran through the courtroom at this unexpected development. Amara maintained her judicial composure, but she allowed herself one brief moment of eye contact with Eleanor in the gallery, a shared acknowledgement that sometimes, against all odds, justice does prevail. "The plea is entered," Amara stated formally. "This court will set a date for sentencing pending review of the plea agreement." As the proceedings continued with technical legal discussions, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The system that had nearly destroyed her had ultimately been forced to confront its failures and begin the difficult process of reform. No single court case would solve the deep-rooted problems of institutional racism and abuse of power, but this very public reckoning represented a crucial step forward. Later that evening, as Amara left the courthouse surrounded by her family and allies, those who had stood by her, when so many others had turned away, she paused on the steps, looking up at the words engraved above the entrance, "Equal justice under law." "Does it feel different?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the inscription. Being on the federal bench? Amara considered the question carefully. The robe is the same. The oath is similar. But yes, it feels different, knowing what it took to get here, what it takes to make those words mean something. As they descended the steps together, a young black law student approached hesitantly, clutching a notebook. "Judge Richardson," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "I followed your case from the beginning. You're the reason I decided to finish law school instead of quitting. I just wanted to say thank you for showing that the system can change, even if someone has to force it to." Amara smiled, recognizing in the young woman's determined expression the same fire that had sustained her through her darkest moments. "The system doesn't change on its own," she told the student, clasping her hand. "It changes because brave people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable." As the group continued down the courthouse steps, Amara felt the weight of both responsibility and possibility. Her individual battle for justice had expanded into something far larger, a watershed moment in the ongoing struggle to make America's promises of equality and justice real for everyone, regardless of race, power, or position. The road ahead remained long and challenging, but for the first time in recent memory, it also seemed genuinely possible to create meaningful change. The Richardson Act would not be a perfect solution, and the reforms it inspired would face resistance. But each case that came before her bench would represent another opportunity to build a more just system, one ruling, one precedent, one principle at a time. The dashcam that had recorded her humiliation had ultimately become the first piece of evidence in a transformation that would outlast any single judge or officer. Justice had not merely been restored, it had been reimagined. And that, Amara reflected as she walked into the future surrounded by the community that had helped her persevere, was perhaps the most meaningful victory of all. Judge Amara Richardson's harrowing journey reveals profound truths about power, justice, and resilience in the face of systemic racism. Her story teaches us that institutions designed to protect justice can sometimes become the greatest threats to it when corrupted by prejudice and unchecked authority. It demonstrates how quickly the machinery of power can mobilize against those who challenge the status quo, especially when those challengers are people of color in positions of influence. The story also illuminates the isolation tactics used to silence those who speak truth to power, how relationships, reputation, and resources can be systematically stripped away to force compliance. Yet it equally shows the extraordinary power of principled resistance, where even a single whistleblower like Officer Carter can help topple an entrenched system of corruption. Perhaps most importantly, Judge Richardson's ordeal reminds us that true justice requires vigilance and courage. Systems don't reform themselves. They change because individuals refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Her transformation from victim to architect of reform demonstrates how personal trauma can be channeled into institutional change when supported by community and unwavering determination. The Richardson Act serves as a powerful reminder that laws and institutions reflect the moral courage of those who shape them. While no single victory can eliminate centuries of structural inequality, each step forward creates space for further progress. Justice isn't merely about punishing wrongdoing, but about reimagining and rebuilding systems so they truly serve everyone equally, regardless of race, power, or position. Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice that made you question the system? What would you have done in Judge Richardson's position when everything and everyone seemed to turn against her? Comment below with your thoughts on how ordinary people can stand up against institutional corruption and racism in their own communities. If this story moved you or made you think differently about justice in America, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more powerful narratives that expose difficult truths and inspire meaningful change. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how privilege and power can distort justice, and how courage and persistence can restore it. Thank you for listening to Judge Richardson's story. May it strengthen our collective resolve to build a truly just society where no one's rights depend on the color of their skin or their position of power.